Do you like chocolate? Good, because one man made sure you'd never run out of it. But why did he put the world's chocolate capital in the middle of a cornfield? How did he go from failing at almost every job to becoming the sweetest success story in America? And the biggest question of all, why did he give away his entire fortune while he was still alive? This is Milton Hershey, the guy who made America addicted to chocolate, built an entire town just so it would smell like cocoa 24/7, and then gave away his fortune like it was melting in his pocket. But how does a man go from failing at cough drops to owning the sweetest empire on earth? Let's unwrap this one. Milton Hershey was born September 13th, 1857 in Derry Township, Pennsylvania, a place so small that if you blinked, you'd probably miss both the town and his childhood. His father, Henry Hershey, was the original side hustle guy, except his hustles had more side than hustle. Every few months he'd try a new business idea, and every few months the universe said, LOL, no. None of it worked. His mother, Fanny, on the other hand, was the no-nonsense type who probably held the entire family together with nothing but sheer willpower and maybe a few biscuits. Milton's childhood wasn't exactly a golden ticket. His parents' marriage was rocky, money was tight, and he ended up moving around a lot. Stability? Yeah, he didn't know her. School wasn't much better. Milton only made it to 4th grade before dropping out. Not because he was dumb, but because back then, if your family needed help, you worked. Milton was already grinding for cash before he even learned what taxes were, which is probably for the best. Even as a kid, Milton had more energy than sense. He wasn't the draw inside the lines type, more like the accidentally draw on the walls and call it modern art type. Fun fact, he spoke Pennsylvania Dutch fluently, which basically meant he could confuse the hell out of people in 2 languages. He was also obsessed with machines from a young age, spending hours tinkering with whatever gears, levers, and broken tools he could find. While other kids were out swapping baseball cards, Milton was out here hoarding broken tools like some kind of 1800s hardware goblin. He was damn good at it. Seriously, if failing were an Olympic sport, he'd have more gold than Michael Phelps. And the man had commitment issues with education. 2 years of school and he was done. Decided classrooms weren't for him, probably because you can't negotiate cocoa prices in algebra. But here's where it gets wild. He was already telling folks he'd make something people would love forever. Now, when a kid says that in 2025, you assume it's about becoming TikTok famous. But Milton, he was plotting world chocolate domination before puberty. Milton Hershey was a walking collection of quirks. He almost never wore brand new clothes. Staff had to break them in for him first. And he hated wasting food so much he'd finish other people's plates at dinner. Yes, billionaire leftovers. He was low-key obsessed with flowers, kept a giant orchid greenhouse, and traveled with absurd amounts of candy just to eat. He carried a little notebook full of half-sentences like, new kind of candy, and don't trust Chicago milk guy. Avoided the number 13, except in recipes where he used exactly 13 ingredients just to tempt fate. He also dodged fancy events, preferred small dinners, and still ordered desserts for everyone like he was running a catering business. Oh, and despite literally making candy for a living, he was annoyingly strict about portion sizes. Milton was not about eating the profits. Before Milton became the Willy Wonka of Pennsylvania, he was basically the king of side quests. His first real job was as an apprentice to a printer, but that lasted about as long as a chocolate bar at a kid's birthday party. The story goes he dropped his hat in a printing machine and got fired, which honestly sounds less like bad luck and more like a creative resignation letter. After that, Milton tried candy making. Sounds perfect, right? Nope. His first candy shop in Philadelphia flopped so hard it might as well have been sponsored by gravity. Why? Turns out he had zero marketing, overestimated how much people were willing to pay for fancy candy, and possibly chose the worst location in the city. Think dark alley, suspicious rats, bad vibes. Then he moved to Denver to learn caramel making, and that tanked too. He got the caramel recipe right, but couldn't keep up with costs and no way to store the stuff, so half his batches turned into sticky bricks you could build a shed with. He kept hopping from city to city, Chicago, New Orleans, New York, basically doing the 1800s version of a failed influencer tour. Chicago was too competitive, New Orleans was too hot and melted his product before it could sell, and New York, well, New York just ate him alive rent-wise. At one point, he was so broke, he had to move back in with his parents, which in the 1800s was basically admitting you'd been defeated by life and by the price of train tickets. But here's what made him dangerous. He never stopped. Every time a business failed, Milton would just open another one like he was collecting failed LLCs for fun. After moving back in with his parents, the 1800s version of hitting rock bottom, Milton wasn't exactly living the dream. But he wasn't ready to give up either. At just 30 years old, he got his hands on a fresh milk caramel recipe he'd picked up in Denver and decided, screw it, let's try again. Using borrowed money, family support, and a level of confidence only found in people who've already failed a lot, he opened the Lancaster Caramel Company. It took off like wildfire. Apparently, people in the 1890s were starving for caramel. But the candy game back then was cutthroat, and between bad partnerships, shaky finances, and the challenge of scaling up, it eventually collapsed. Still, this wasn't just a sugar-coated disaster. It planted the seed for the empire he'd build later, when knowledges designed them to grows beading or grain or madeless. They said the fans walking and screens over they condibus, to speakos get it. You know how some people can't walk past a bakery without just looking and then somehow leave with 6 cupcakes? Milton Hershey was like that with candy, only instead of buying it, he wanted to own the whole damn recipe. After years of riding the caramel wave, he stumbled across European chocolate-making techniques at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago and had a light bulb moment. Caramel is good, but chocolate is forever. Back then, chocolate was basically an expensive luxury for the rich, but Milton saw potential for the everyday person to unwrap happiness without selling a kidney. He poured his time into perfecting milk chocolate, something Americans hadn't really mastered yet, and even experimented with white chocolate years later, partly because he loved innovation and partly because, well, it freaked people out in a why isn't it brown kind of way. His obsession with texture, taste, and shelf life turned into a full-blown mission, and before long he was making chocolate bars that were smooth, affordable, and addictive enough to make dentists nervous. Once Milton had cracked the milk chocolate code, things went from small candy guy to sweet empire real quick. His bars were smoother than gossip at a small-town diner, and priced so everyone, from coal miners to bankers, could get a taste. Demand skyrocketed, and Milton doubled down, building factories that could pump out chocolate like a sugar-fueled army. He didn't just sell candy, he sold affordable luxury. Kids saved pennies to buy his bars, soldiers took them to war, and suddenly Hershey chocolate wasn't just a treat, it was part of American life. From kisses to cocoa powder, he turned his name into something you could both eat and trust. And while other candy makers were busy playing catch-up, Milton was already thinking of his next big move, making his chocolate the gold standard, without the actual gold price tag. By 1903, Milton Hershey wasn't just making chocolate, he was building an empire brick by brick, or more accurately, brick by cocoa bean. That year, construction began on both the Hershey factory and the town around it. Derry Township / Hershey, Pennsylvania. A town that was basically SimCity, but with more cocoa powder in the air. By 1905, the factory roared to life, and over the next few years, the town filled with streets that were laid out neatly, houses were built for workers, schools for their kids, a theater for entertainment, and of course, the sweet smell of chocolate floating around like an eternal Instagram filter. Imagine waking up every day to the scent of fresh chocolate. Sounds like heaven, until you realize your dentist also lives in town, sharpening his tools like a Marvel villain. Neat houses, schools, churches, parks, and even a trolley system, all funded by chocolate money. It wasn't some grim industrial hub, it was designed to be clean, safe, and actually nice to live in, so his workers wouldn't quit and run off to another candy gig. By the 1910s, Hershey's chocolate was traveling coast to coast, and before long, overseas. Hershey's chocolate factories became a global production powerhouse, shipping bars across America and eventually the world. His empire stretched so far that his chocolate ended up in soldiers' rations during both world wars, ensuring that even in a foxhole, someone could still say, "Pass me a Hershey's." It wasn't just candy anymore. It was culture. It was comfort. And it was one man's way of proving that chocolate can, in fact, take over the world. What started as one man's caramel comeback story had turned into a sugar-powered civilization. And Milton was the benevolent, but very cocoa-obsessed, ruler. In 1918, with the Hershey Company at the absolute top of its game, Milton Hershey pulled what might be the most wholesome plot twist in business history. Instead of hoarding his fortune like a dragon sitting on cocoa gold, he quietly signed over the majority of his company's stock, worth around $60 million back then, over $1.6 billion today, to the Hershey Industrial School for Orphaned Boys. No press conference, no dramatic check-handing ceremony, not even a braggy headline in the paper. He just did it. His logic? If you've got the money to fix problems, you should probably get to work. The trust he created still funds the school today, helping thousands of kids get housing, education, and a shot at life. And while most billionaires today are debating whether to buy a yacht or a second yacht, Hershey spent his final decades building parks, improving his chocolate town, and handing out more sugar than a dentist's worst nightmare. He could have gone down as just the chocolate guy, but instead, Milton Hershey became proof that you can be rich, famous, and still not be a complete jackass. So next time you unwrap a Hershey bar, remember, you're not just eating chocolate. You're tasting the legacy of a man who built an empire, gave it all away, and somehow made sweetness his life's biggest flex. Peace out.